want to start with two unrelated matters which I have discussed many times in the past. And in one, it seems like I just made a mistake. And the other, I got an answer to a question which has bothered me for many, many years. So I'd like to share that with you, and I'd like to see what's being recorded, so it'll be, in the virtual world. I used to complain that in English we talk about sacrifices, whereas the two words in Hebrew which denote the offerings in the temple, korban and mincha, have no connotation whatsoever that I end up with less afterwards, which what the word sacrifice does. Korban is something which brings me close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and mincha means gift. Neither one semantically implies that I end up with less, that I'm giving up something. So I used to say that calling a sacrifice was just an English mistake. I heard from my oldest son Friday afternoon a very beautiful Dvar Torah. This is Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra, and he says that the pasuk begins with Adam ki yakriv mikem, person who offers from himself, and the Gemara says Malamit might gezel, that's to exclude something that's stolen. And you learn it because Adam Arishon, who brought the first sacrifices, there was nothing stolen in what he brought, because everything was his. Now, to that idea, he had two questions. First of all, is that the spitz, the highest point, the essence of the performance of offering to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it shouldn't be stolen? Does that describe the essence of the offering, that it shouldn't be stolen? After all, if you tell me that you don't do an avera to provide yourself with the means to do a mitzvah, that disqualifies any mitzvah, not just sacrifices. So why would that be the first most important qualification to mention in the Torah? And second of all, we have a whole sugya in the Gemara called Danin Efshar Mi'i Efshar, where you say, A did it this way, so we should do it this way. But in A's case, it was impossible to do it any other way. And for us, it is possible to do it another way. So how can I learn from A, who didn't have the possibility, what I should do when I do have the possibility? No, it's all so give the Gemara with you. Do learn it. You don't learn it. How much you learn, and so forth and so on. And here it seems like when you say that Adam didn't use something stolen, when in his time, since he owned everything, it wasn't possible for anything to be stolen, that the learning is a weak, peripheral type of learning. It's not essential in any way. Thank you very much. So he said, I sort of reformulated it in my terms, but this is what I understood him to say. This is like what they call a brisker chakira, right? When you disqualify something stolen, is it the positive fact that it's stolen that disqualifies it? Or is it the lack of being yours that disqualifies it? Of course they go hand in hand, because it's stolen, it's not yours. But the fact is that this item has two dimensions. And the question is, which dimension is the one that's creating the outcome? Is the fact that it has a stamp of illegal activity in the fact that it's stolen, a transgression was done? Is that what does it? Or is it that it's lacking the positive factor that it's yours? Now, what is the verb from which this is learned? Adam ki yakriv mikem. The sacrifice to be from you. It has to be you that's sacrificed. So it sounds like disqualification is not that a transgression has been done in it, it's that it lacks being you, because it's stolen. It's not you, it's somebody else's. Then you don't learn from Adam because there was no stolen thing, the negative. You learn from Adam because everything was his. Everything was him. When he offered a sacrifice, it was from him. And that is essential. It's essential that it should be something of you going on the altar. That is essential to the activity of offering. And to answer my question, but what about the fact that the two nouns that refer to the objects, neither noun refers to my losing something or ending up with less? That's true, but the adverb does, because it's Adam ki yakriv mikem. When a person offers, he should offer from himself. If he offers from himself, then he has less afterwards. So it's written in the verse, it just isn't written in the nouns. So it sounds like when the English calls this activity sacrifices, it's not bad. Not bad. It does refer to an essential element of what's going on. So this, my complaint against the word of sacrifices, which I have made 50 times, at least in the past, and certainly recorded many times, I learned on Friday was superficial, was a mistake. That's one point.
Cards for Hirsch. Hirsch in German. So he says that really the correct translation would be offering on sacrifice on the same.
Okay, so that's true about the nouns, but I don't know what he would say about being medayek, the concept from the word mikem. Maybe my reading Hirsch is what led me off. It could be, because I read Hirsch, not all of it, but it's a considerable amount of Hirsch. That's one thing. The other thing is, everybody knows that the Oretz did not fulfill Kiviyachol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's command about the trees. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to give forth eitz pri osa pri, fruit trees bearing fruit, and the earth gave forth eitz osa pri, trees bearing fruit, not fruit trees bearing fruit. So it's recorded that the Oretz did not do what it was told to do. That's literal in the words. The Maharal on Rashi, his essay called Gur Aryeh, comments, the earth is not an agent. The earth doesn't have free will. Not a question of guilt. That's a misreading of what the Chazal is telling us. What Chazal is telling us is that there's a gap between Shamayim v'Aretz. A command coming from heaven cannot be completely fulfilled by Aretz, by earth. The physical cannot completely live up to the demands of the spiritual. There's a gap. And he brings, as a reference, the famous verse, which I'm going to quote to you now, and I'm quoting it correctly. Most people who say it quote it incorrectly. Ein Adam Tzadik Ba'aretz Asher Ya'aseh Tov Lo Yechta. People leave out the word Adam typically. There's no person righteous in the world who will do good and not sin, Yechta. And Maharal asks, why does the verse tell me there's no person righteous in the earth who will do good and not sin? Do we have any doubts as to where he is? Where do you think he is? In space? On the moon? Why does it say in the earth? Says the Maharal, the verse is explaining to you why he will not have a perfect performance, why there will be a chet, there will be a sin, because he's partly aretz. He's partly made out of something gashmi, out of something material, and that makes it impossible for him to completely fulfill the command coming from Shammai. That's what the Maharal says. So I have asked for 50 years, but then how can he be responsible for the failure? How can you call it a sin? If it's really programmed, that he's not able to do a perfect job, then the imperfections ought to be something that's beyond his control. If it's not beyond his control, he's not responsible for it. How can you call it a sin? And in order to make this point, you have to be very careful. The verse says he can't do a perfect job. There'll be some failure. We have to imagine a person who limits the failure only to that which he wouldn't have been able to overcome. So the missing part is the part that's beyond his ability. If it's beyond his ability, right? That puzzle, and I asked many people that question, and I couldn't get an answer. I was on Friday or Thursday, I asked my Rebbitzin, and she gave me an instant answer. She's not responsible. You're absolutely right. Just like the earth wasn't responsible, he's not responsible either. Yechta literally means missing the mark. It's a word that's used for an archer who misses the target. She said, who says says he's responsible? He's a criminal. He's guilty. He has to do penances over the so on. It doesn't say that. It says his performance isn't perfect. It doesn't say that he has to do tshuva. His performance isn't perfect. So I said, well, if that's the case, if it's not telling me he's a sinner, then what is the verse telling me that's of interest? What am I supposed to learn from the verse? And she said, what you learn from the verse is, it's the aretz that pulls you down. And not everything you do could have been overcome. Many of the things the Oretz influences you to do, you can overcome. That's where your enemy is. So focus on that and oppose it and seek to overcome it as much as you can. But of course, if you do as much as you can, you're not responsible for the rest of the failure because that's built in. It's a failure of performance, but not a failure of action. Yeah.
Is the sort of false guilt we're supposed to feel a mechanism by which we oppose the arts to the degree that we can?
Say it again.
So we mentioned at the start that the earth felt guilt or something for not being able to fulfill Shemaim's command.
No, I didn't say that. On the contrary, I said the Maharal says the earth is not an agent. The earth is not guilty. The earth, right? Mm-hmm. It's just saying that the earth. The point of the Chazal, says the Maharal, is to tell you that earth cannot do that. If there will be a failure, it's an incompatibility between the demand that Shemayim makes and what the earth can perform. But not that there's any guilt at all.
So just to rephrase it, then the irrational feeling of falling short, is that there because of a goal we can't achieve? Is that there as a way to combat the arts in ourselves so that we can close that gap?
Again, when you talk about the irrational feeling of falling short, this depends upon the distinction I'm making between performance on the one hand and responsibility and liability on the other hand. And if you perceive a gap between your performance on the one hand and the requirements on the other hand, that's not irrational. It's true. There is a gap. That's the point of a lo yechta. It's not going to be lo yechta. There'll be yechta there. But if you take responsibility for it and you feel guilty about it, and you feel you have to make amends for it, that would be irrational. But you don't have to have that feeling. Why should you have irrational feelings?
But people have that instinct.
They do, but then you have to overcome it. Why should you have that irrational feeling? What good does it do you?
If it serves a positive role in combating the arts in the self, then maybe it's useful and it's meant to be there for a reason.
But people talk about this, Robert Nozick and other people, about using irrational ideas to promote good performance. He wants to talk about the paradox of sunk costs to do that. No, I think that since there is a rational approach, appreciation, which would lead you to the same motivation, you say, but it'll be more. Yeah, but it'll be more based on a false perception and false things tear you down. So unless you have a special source for this being an exception where you should have a false idea, it's not something that I would applaud.
Well, you brought up that we in some sense incorporate irrational emotions. You had a good shear on that and how we still sort of say I don't know, is the bracha or something on them. And
yeah.
Then we have a place for
Okay, that's good. I'm glad you remembered that. But I said specifically there that the reason why I came to a more subtle understanding is because the Torah placed a stamp of approval on those emotions. It doesn't explode it into all irrational emotions of be welcomed, and you should be afraid of the dark, and afraid of crowded places, and you should believe that you'll win in the gambling house because the Torah is in favor of all irrational emotions.
But if I can
No.
find a specific stamp for this,
Where do you see the stamp?
I don't know, but if I found it.
If you found it, that's a logical truth. And if you found a good stamp, then use the stamp, for sure. Anyway, I wanted to put those two things on record because I've spoken about them many times, and I made those two mistakes. Very good. So we're on page 46 of the Family Haggaddah Art Scroll Masorah series. Now we all have the same ones. We have all the same page. That's really a big advantage. So we did with the Lefichach paragraph last time, and then we said Lefichach is very, very important. We just said in the previous paragraph that every generation we have to look upon ourselves as that we left Egypt. And the Lefichach does two things. First of all, it justifies what I said now 6 times, starting at the beginning, that the purpose of the evening's activity is to relive the events, and it's because we've relived the events that we have an obligation to praise God for what happened. Not that there aren't other reasons that require praise. It's not that only reliving would require it, but on this night, what requires it is the fact that we're reliving it. And this goes hand in glove together with Rabbi Meiselman's wonderful explanation, which I told you, that the idea of shir and shira have two aspects. One is praise of God, and one is thanksgiving. And that when God told the angels at the parting of the sea and the drowning of the Egyptians, they shouldn't say shira, that's because for them it was only praise. And the fact that we did say shira is because for us it was praise and thanksgiving. And the disqualification of Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim B'Yam, that works of my hands are drowning in the sea, only cancels out praise. It does not cancel out thanksgiving. And that's why the Jews at the time were able to say shira and the angels not. And in later generations, where the Jews were not present at the sea, we too could not say shira. That's why Hallel is limited on the seventh day of Pesach, and the intermediary day of Pesach, demoted from a law to a custom, because we're not able to say praise on an event which, so to speak, was costly to God. That's all in the sources. Rabbi Meiselman asks, what about the night of the Seder, which we're doing now in the Haggaddah? Weren't all the Egyptian firstborn killed on the night of the Haggaddah? They were. So why doesn't Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim B'Yam also apply on that night? The work of my hands are drowning in the sea. They're drowning in the plague against the firstborn. Why doesn't it cancel out our saying shira? So you say on the night when they were in Egypt, they were being freed through that, saved and freed. So that was thanksgiving for them. That's what justified their saying it. Well, what about later generations when we weren't there? And the answer is, the later generations, we were there. That's what that told us, that previous part. We were there. We're reliving what happened to them. And that's why we too, on the first night of Pesach, can say the Hallel of, because we're reliving it. This now justifies saying it in the face of Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim B'Yam. In the face of my creatures are dying. Right? It isn't as if you need reliving the events as an ability to say praise, but if you're going to say shira in the face of Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim B'Yam, then you need something more than just praise. But thanksgiving is what gives us the right to say it. I think it works out very beautifully. Rabbi Meiselman's idea works out very beautifully. Okay, now Hallel starts. Now, saying Hallel at the Seder is a mystery in halakhic terms. Many, not everybody, I think, has the custom to say Hallel in shul, but we have a custom to say Hallel 3 times on the first day of Pesach. We say it in shul in the evening, and then we say it in the Haggaddah, and then we say it in the morning as part of the services in the morning. Here, you say Hallel without an opening bracha. Number one. Number two, you say now the first 2 paragraphs of Hallel, and then you have the whole meal. And then afterwards, we finish Hallel. And that's very strange, because it is at least part of the recital of Hallel that shouldn't be interrupted. And there are different levels of this requirement of continuity. When you say it with a bracha, then it's built into the idea of the bracha, because the first bracha starts with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, which is what every bracha starts with, and the bracha at the end doesn't start with Baruch. So it's a bracha that's connected to another bracha, and the Hallel in between is just what fills the space, because it's a bracha on reciting Hallel. If you make an interruption, then you're decapitating the bracha at the end, which needs the beginning bracha as its head. If you don't make a bracha, we who follow the Pesach of the Mechaber on Rosh Chodesh, we don't make a bracha at Hallel at all, neither before or after. But still, you're not supposed to interrupt. And here you interrupt with the whole meal. That's very strange. How do you justify that? And the thing that I have told you now 7 times, and now I'm going to tell you an 8th time, answers this question too. Because if the whole purpose of the evening's performance is to relive the experience, and if, as we said last time, the previous time, that you have to know the symbolism of the things that you eat, because they who lived through that experience, they who were in Egypt knew very well the symbolism of what they were eating. They lived it. They were living it at the time. And if we don't know what it symbolized for them, we aren't reliving what they're living. That's what Rabbi Gamliel says. If you don't know what the symbolism I'm explaining to you, you haven't fulfilled your obligation fully, perfectly. So now you read Rabbi Gamliel, and you do know what the symbolism is. So you eat it with the symbolism. You eat it as part of the reenacting of what happened to them. That's not an interruption. That's not an interruption. The saying of the Hallel is also an expression of what they felt, what they went through, what their ideas were, what their hopes were. So since it's part of the very same reenacting, it's not really an interruption. So that fits also very well.
Does that answer why there's no bracha rishona?
No, it doesn't answer why there's no bracha rishona. The truth is that in the Lefichach you have the sentiment of the bracha rishona, but you don't have I don't remember the answer to the question why we don't have the bracha rishona, a formal bracha rishona. In truth, in the end, it's not clear because it depends on how you end it. Some end it with the end of Hallel, and some end it with the end of Yishtabach. So if you end it with Yishtabach, then you didn't have the whole institution of a bracha on Hallel isn't said. If you end it the other way, then you have half. I don't remember the answer to that question. Now, I've given shiurim on Hallel before, and they're recorded. So for now, I'm going to skip the first 2 paragraphs of Hallel and go through some other things. And depending, we have until Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, until including Wednesday. We'll see. If I have extra time, I'll do some more on Hallel. So we come to the last bracha here. This bracha closes Maggid, the performance of the recital part of the performance. And this is what it says. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors. There it is again. The Haggaddah doesn't waste an opportunity to make the point that our presence is not just through the peoplehood of ourselves together with our ancestors, but it's us and our ancestors personally, individually. And you brought us this night to eat matzah amor. That's what you have done. Now we have our petition. Thus, Hashem, our God and God of our fathers, should enable us to reach other holidays, not just this holiday, which are coming to greet us with peace, rejoicing in the rebuilding of your city, and another word for rejoicing, in your service. And we will eat there of the various sacrifices, and in particular, the psachim, depending upon the girsa here, which their blood shall reach the wall of your altar in will, meaning you'll be willing, you'll accept our service willingly. And then, shir chadash, and there we will he says praise. One second. I'm a little surprised by that. Know that we said modim can mean 2 things. It can mean to acknowledge, to assert, to affirm, to state, or it can mean to thank. He says here to praise. Shir Chadash. Anyway, we are going to express this new song. We spoke about the difference between masculine and feminine. A masculine song is a song for an end of a process. A feminine song is for a redemption which is in the middle of a process which might repeat. And here we're talking about the future. When the temple is rebuilt in the future, that's the end of Jewish suffering and Jewish persecution and Jewish scatter and Jewish division. So that will be a final song, poetry. And then it ends that Hashem redeemed the Jewish people. That's the end of the recital part. Now comes Rachza, Motzi, Matzah. You make the blessings on the matzah. You eat the matzah, the moror. And then you come to Korech, where we say, Zecher l'mikdash kehillel. This is a remembrance of the temple like Hillel. Because this is what Hillel used to do when the temple existed. He used to combine together, make a sandwich. Now, some people leave out the word Pesach here, but I think that I can't understand that. This is what he used to do, so you talk about what he did. He used to take the Pesach and matzah and moror and make a sandwich out of it and eat it together to fulfill the verse, the literal verse, that you eat the Paschal sacrifice on, which can mean together with, in addition to, matzos and merorim, matzos and bitter herbs. So he used to make a sandwich out of it. And we're doing what he did. The question is, what are we doing? So he did it. Do we paskin like Hillel? That you have to do that? No. So what are we doing? We're doing it because he did it and a kind of respect. We do this sometimes. Even though legally you're allowed to be lenient to something, but you want to fulfill all possible opinions. You say, okay, we'll do it in order to fulfill all possible opinions. You can't do it just like Hillel because the taste of the myrrh is mavatl the taste of the matzah. We can't do that. Okay, we do the best we can. So we do it twice. But here it says zecher l'mikdash ki Hillel. It's not zecher l'Hillel. It's not zecher to Hillel had a different view, so we'll do what he did out of respect for him. No, it's zecher l'mikdash that we're doing like Hillel. What is zecher l'mikdash? And in particular, when we think about our relationship to the past temple, which is destroyed, we usually think of it in terms of mourning. It's really mourning. You break a glass at the wedding. I've learned now that at a Tanoim also, when they break a plate, it's also in part, you put ashes on the forehead of the chassan. In a house built for a Jew, it's only where the halacha applies. Where a house is built for a Jew, you have to have a square piece of the wall which is unfinished, to a memorial for the temple. Mm-hmm. Those are all aspects of mourning. Would you introduce an aspect of mourning into the Pesach Haggaddah, into the Seder? Doesn't sound right. It's a time of simcha. You don't have any mourning on a holiday. You'll tell me that the temple is different, but it isn't different. You don't do that. So what exactly is this supposed to mean? And you have it on Sukkot also, because according to the verse telling us about waving the lulav and esrog, it's quite clear that the mitzvah is only the first day, except in the temple. In the temple it's 7 days, 6 days. Shabbos yes, Shabbos no. It's the whole week. So Yochanan Zakkai made a rule that we should take the lulav and esrog 6 days, everywhere in the world, zecher l'mikdash. What was he doing? Introducing a kind of mourning for the temple in the holiday Sukkot. My Rebbe Zatzal had he emphasized this to us a number of times. The general idea, and this particular idea, the Torah is a Torah of rules and laws and values and goals and spirituality and everything else. And in addition, the Torah is a Torah of emotions. Emotions are not free. Emotions are not arbitrary. Emotions are not accidental. Your service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires emotional tuning as well. And here he said, vis-a-vis the lost temple, there are two different emotions, two different realities that we have to relate to. One he called Zecher l'Churban, which is a remembrance of the destruction, not of the temple, but the destruction of the temple. And the other is Zecher l'Mikdash, which is a remembrance of the temple. And the difference, I'll tell you abstractly, and then I'll apply it to you. The difference is, Zecher l'Churban means remembering the destruction, what we lost and what we suffered. And Zecher l'Mikdash means to remember what's left, what still exists, what we can still realize and relate to. Both are true. Appreciation for the temple requires both, the negative and the positive. And the seed of deserving the rebuilding of the temple is to realize both of them. So, it means that by doing what Hillel did, even now, when there is no temple, we can access what is left of the temple still in existence. We can relate to it, we can prize it, treasure it, and that way show appreciation for what is left. And the same with Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai did. Of course, you have to have gigantic Ruach HaKodesh to do this, to figure out that this is what needs to be done, because you're dealing with metaphysical realities here. But when a person takes this, he shouldn't take it with a krechts, oi, the destroyed temple, oi, we don't have the temple. No, that's not the spirit. The spirit is that something of the presence of the temple is still in the world, and we have to access that and treasure it. Maybe it's a little bit like, using the word zecher, we talk about zecher tzadik levracha. Now, maybe zecher doesn't really mean memory. That's another shir I could give you. But something of the life of that tzaddik is still a bracha. Bracha means something that does something. A bracha has an effect on the world. It moves the world in a certain way. What the tzaddik lived is still moving the world in a certain way. Well, okay, since I've said it, I'll briefly. We have a mitzvah, Timcha Zecher Amalek. To wipe out the Zecher of Amalek. What's the Zecher? Zecher, what?
Memory.
No!
Oh.
No! Good guess, was wrong, dead wrong. Wipe out the memory? Absolutely not. Lo tishkach, it says, don't forget. The very same verse says, don't forget. No, Zecher Chazal is his houses, his trees, his animals, his books, whatever is in the world that he produced should be destroyed. What Zecher is what's left over. What's left over from his existence in the world. Which means that when you talk about a Zecher Tzadik Devracha, it means you're talking about what's left over. He left over something in the world. There's something in the world of him that's producing blessing. It's a reality that's in the world. And then that's what it means here when Zecher l'Mikdash. There is a Zecher for the Mikdash. That's just a memory, you should remember. And we're accessing it, just like with the whole spirit of the holiday is something which we are accessing. We're able to access some aspects of the temple as well. Didn't totally disappear from the world. A very, very deep idea. Okay, now just before benching, what's going on here? Oh, right, sorry. Then comes benching, and then right after benching is this very disturbing, difficult, shocking paragraph that is disturbing and shocking to certain people who have come from a certain background. Shvocha Mascha. This is on page 63. Pour out your wrath upon the nations that do not recognize you and upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name. For they have devoured Yaakov and destroyed his, capital H, his, God's habitation, not Jacob's habitation, God's habitation, meaning the temple. Pour your anger on them, let your fiery wrath overtake them. Pursue them with wrath and annihilate them from beneath the heavens of Hashem. That's pretty bitter. That's pretty rough. And it doesn't sound conciliatory and friendly and sympathetic and merciful and all the other things that you would like to hear. I can't fully explain it to you because it needs much more background, much more identification with Jewish history, with the Psalms of David and the rest. But I can say a couple of things to perhaps reduce the brutal misapprehensions and negative feelings that will accompany this paragraph. There are two verses that give instructions which seem, superficially anyway, to conflict. One is, Bin pol oivecha al tismach, when your enemy falls, don't rejoice. Which sounds sympathetic and merciful and so forth and so on. And the other is, Ba'avodah shoyim rina, when the wicked are destroyed, there is joy. Now, so, what if my enemy is wicked? What should I do? But the first point is, it might not be identical. If it's not identical, then you can relieve the contradiction very, very simply. If you're against this person because he's your enemy, only because he's your enemy, he may not be evil. He's just against you. Either because he misunderstands you, or because maybe you really have done things that are wrong, or who knows what. And it's the fact that he's against you that's motivating you to rejoice in his downfall. Don't do that. Not right to do that. We'll come to the end of that verse in a minute, Miyas Hashem. It's a little bit less friendly than you might think. But if he's wicked, if he's objectively wicked, the world is a better place when wicked people disappear. It would be even better if they would do tshuva and repent. That's true. That's quite true. And if we could do something to make them repent, then that would be quite true. But either it's over, and we have to know what attitude to have when it's over, or there are sources indicating that it's beyond our ability to do so, then their destruction, removal from the world, is pushing the world a step up. The world is a better place that these people have been removed from the world. So that's why there's joy. It means joy is an appropriate thing to do and to feel. And of course, if it happens to be the same person, then you have to attune your psychology so that it's the fact that he's wicked that causes your rejoicing, and not the fact that he is your enemy that's causing your rejoicing. And so you can do that. You can say there are two things going on, and if it were for this, I'd be neutral. But since it's for that, I'm rejoicing. That's not difficult to do psychologically. Now, look at the verses here and let's see what they say, what we just read. Pour your wrath upon the nations that do not recognize you, and upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name. It has nothing to do with us. Jacob isn't even mentioned in that first sentence. That's just that they are at odds with God. That definitely describes them as wicked. Okay? Now comes Jacob. For they have devoured Jacob. Who's Jacob? I don't know. You know? I don't know. Oh, I have a record. Somebody called Jacob doesn't say it's us, doesn't say it's our ancestors. How many times did we say we and our ancestors in the previous text? 10? We're not in this paragraph at all. There's someone called Jacob, and this is what these wicked people have done, and it's a terrible thing that they've done. Right? Not representing us in any direct sense at all. And destroyed his habitation, meaning God's habitation. So it's back to what they did against God. Pour out your anger upon them, let your fiery wrath overtake them, pursue them with wrath, and annihilate them from our backyard. Get them out of here. We don't want to suffer from them anymore. That's not what it says. It says from under the heavens of Hashem. You're running the world. They are setting themselves up as obstacles to your reign, to your influence, to your impact upon the world. And we are asking that they be removed from that position. If anything, this sounds like us identifying with the objective evil that these people do to God's world, and we are expressing the fact that we want to see God's world improved. It is not obviously a self-centered petition at all. Now, I wish I remember the exact end of the words, but the verse "bin pol levech al tismach," don't take pleasure in the downfall of your enemy, says that the verse goes on to say, lest God see and remove his wrath from him. Wow, pay attention. That means you're shooting yourself in the foot if you rejoice when your enemy goes down. You're shooting yourself in the foot. God is after him. He's falling because God is punishing him. But if you take pleasure, then God will see and he won't punish him. So, when Rava was sick, and the second day when he was sick, he said, make a public announcement that I'm sick, because my friends will daven for me. Right? That's good. And my enemies will rejoice on my sickness. And God will see that, and he'll take away my sickness. They'll be shooting themselves in the foot. Let them rejoice. It's good for me. Good for me that they should rejoice. Right? So, there's a certain sense of so don't put yourself in God's place. You don't see any objective evil in him. Maybe there is, because Baruch Hu's doing it to him for some reason or other. But what would cause you to be happy is only that he's your enemy. Don't rejoice at that. Don't rejoice at that. So I don't think that this has God is not my warrior to right my wrongs. This is understood as a wrong that they did against God. Okay, that I said doesn't do the whole job, but it does a lot of the job. All right, now comes the rest of Hallel, which I said if we have time, I will talk about. Then comes Hallel Haggaddah. So now this is on page 70. This is now beyond normal Hallel. This is called Hallel Haggaddah. It's one of the Psalms of King David, and it's 26 verses long, same numerical value as God's name, and some, do they do it here? No. Some Siddurim actually divided up into 10 and 5, and 6 and 5, because in a certain sense they are divided that way. And the refrain is Kili Olam Chasdo, 26 times. His kindness, loving kindness is forever. And here's a long list of things that we give praise for, and many of them are historical ideas, the times that he saved us and things that he did for us. I'll just make one remark, because people ask this. Let's start from the beginning. Let's see the fourth one. To him alone who does great wonders. Okay. Who makes the heavens with understanding. Stretched. Now, notice, translator. Who makes Let's see. Does great wonders, present tense. Makes the heaven, present tense. Stretched out, past tense. Earth over the waters. Makes the luminaries, present tense. They're all present tense. They're all present tense. Now, this one, the Yeshivat Ohr Somayach, because you say it every day. You say it in the morning after Baruch Hu, the first blessing preceding the Shema, where it accompanies the idea that Kodesh Baruch Hu is Machadesh Tomim Ma'aseh Bereishis, that God is continuously renewing the work of creation. And it quotes this verse. And the commentators say, well, it's present tense. And say he made the great luminaries, then he makes the great luminaries. It does say that. And the other ones could also be present tense. But then you have who struck the Egyptians through their firstborn, and in the Hebrew it's present tense. You have who divided the sea of reeds into parts, and it's present tense. Who threw Egypt and his army into this, right? Struck many great kings, present tense. So the critic says, why are you making a big deal out of the present tense of the luminaries, saying there's something he's doing all the time, when you have the present tense attached to past events? And they're not doing it all the time. These are events that had happened once in history, and they're over. So I think one answer, just in grammar, is this. When you have a phrase that's used inconsistently, you have to decide which is the norm and which is the exception. And then you try to find some explanation for the exception. Right? So the two ways out here are to say, well, what we're learning is what we call present tense is sometimes past tense. It just is. And therefore you can't ever say that it's present rather than past, because it could be either one. That seems very extravagant, because the number of places where a clear present tense is used for a past event is 1/100th of 1%. And all the rest, present tense is for present events that take place. So here, I think what you have to say is the other way around. Present is present, and present means present. And where it means past, that's the exception. And there, for a few verses scattered here and there, where it works that way, you have to have some explanations to why it's an exception. So here, when the tefillah quotes Oseh or Gottelib, he makes the lights, it makes it in the present tense. It's very fair to say that it's talking about something that's present, and therefore it means continuous recreation of the world. In the case of the few past events, they get the present tense here. This is poetry, after all. So it could be a poetical usage, but it's not good to call into question that present tense could be used equally well for the past. It's just simply not true.
Isn't the whole Haggaddah a reliving of past events? Which we're saying is for us now, but...
Yes, but this is again Hallel Haggaddah. This is not part of the Haggadah. This is taken from King David's Psalms, 1,000 years before.
It's together for a reason.
It could be. I just then I'd have to prove it on the basis of King David's text. And that would be a reasonable thing to do. I just don't know how to do it. Okay. And then we say Nishmas. And then here in this Haggadah you end with Yishtabach, which means you don't have a bracha on Hallel either way. There's no bracha on Hallel in the Haggadah at all. And then you say the bracha on it. Then finally comes Nirtzah. I haven't got time to really do this. That's the very ending. The fact that it is that our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is accepted in favor. That's what Nirtzah means. I'll just read you through it now, and then I'll study it with you tomorrow. people sing this and they dance. We do. We dance when it's over. And it's an unbelievable feeling of having been able to do it, and the longing for doing it b'shleimus, doing it completely when we'll have the temple, and doing it with all of the mitzvahs that have to be done. The Seder Pesach, the order of the Pesach, has finished according to its laws. We fulfilled all the mitzvahs that Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave us to do, like every one of its. And now the three, it's halachos, mishpat, chok, like the Chacham said at the beginning. Just as we have merited to be able to order it, so too should we merit in the future to do it, carry it out in practice, because it's called Seder Pesach. Pesach refers to the Pesach offering, and we now went through the trimmings, but we didn't do the offering itself. Now poetry. Pure One, who dwells on high, raise up your community, congregation that's uncountable. He dwells on high, and we ask him to raise us up. That means bring us into connection with him. Soon, the offshoots, nitei, are like the saplings or the transplanted beginning plants, should guide the offshoots of your plants. Beduyim should redeem to Zion with glad song, because there are two analogies to the process of redemption. One is sudden, abrupt, and unexpected, and the other is extremely gradual. One is the growth of plants, and the other is the blast of the horn of salvation. And that's why in weekday Shemona Esrei, you have Matzmiach, Keren, Yeshua. It's what in English is called a mixed metaphor, which is forbidden in composition, right? Matzmiach is a word that refers to plant growth, and a Keren is an appendage of an animal. So, in English composition class, that would be that gets you a red X and minus 5 points. You can't do that. But here, the idea is to make reference to both aspects. That could be one way, it could be the other way, it could be a combination of both ways, and that's what we're hoping for. We'll talk about this more tomorrow.